Hello, I'm Hilton Supra, the Vice Chairman of Student Group. I'm very pleased to conduct this interview with Leonard Dorlöchter today, Chief Product Officer and co-founder of peaq, which is peaq, where we interview people who are changing the world, people that are inspiring us with their achievements, creativity, and acumen with the use of technology. In previous interviews, Dinner Squad and I have interviewed over 200 amazing people and achieved more than 12.7 million views on YouTube. This interview series on Citiesabc is in partnership with our other platforms, openbusinesscouncil.org, fashionabc.org, which are all fourth industrial revolution platforms utilizing technologies that employ the use of truth and trust, obviously, through blockchain, and the development and deployment of data analytics, AI, and machine learning. So today I'd like to introduce you to Leonard. He's a serial entrepreneur and technology-driven person. He's currently the Chief Product Officer, co-founder of peaq, which is the Web3 network that powers the economy called the economy of things. You've all heard of Internet of Things as an economy of things, which we'll explain in a second. So Leonard started Business Informatics. He studied at Technische University of Berlin. He then moved into another projects, which included founding the teams of Advanced Blockchain AG, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And he's built multiple organizations, teams, and particular products in the last 5 years, so a very prolific early career. He operates at the intersection between that whole sort of business and engineering, and he likes the idea of its being disruptive and disruptive to ecosystems. So as a Web3 executive, he is also associated with Sigma Squared Society. And this is a very interesting society, which is a non-profit organization. And it's a global community for young, ambitious founders under 26. Okay, and really focusing on impact-driven initiatives and how they can transform various industries. So, Leonard, welcome.
Thanks a lot for having me, Hilton. Great to be here.
I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. So let's try and find out who is Leonard. So basically, obviously, you are currently in Berlin.
Correct.
You were born, obviously, you tell us where you were born. Tell us a little bit about your background and what was your first step and interest into technology?
Yeah, my pleasure. So I was born in a small city close to Cologne in Western Germany. And there was not much going on in that small city. And I was always very curious to get to know the world and go somewhere where there's a lot happening. So once I finished school, I started traveling, and I traveled around and got to see many different places. But also while going to school, I was already interested in doing things differently, because I always thought, okay, just going down the path of studying and then entering a corporate career sounded or felt like a boring path for me, and a path where I couldn't really have the impact I wanted to have, because from a very early age on, I felt like I want to have an impact and change the world for the better. It sounds, sounds big, right? But then I thought about, okay, how can I do that? And I stumbled upon entrepreneurship at the age of 13, where someone gifted me the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I started reading and understanding, okay, there's a whole different way of doing things. And this is through entrepreneurship. And then further, I thought about, okay, what kind of entrepreneur do I want to be? And how can I really maximize my impact? And technology is just the greatest tool we have as humans to create progress, to make the world a better place, to solve big problems. So it became clear for me that I wanted to dive deeper into technology, which I then also did by starting to study business informatics, looking into how technology works, how the internet works, started to learn developing, building some websites, which kind of led me into product development, because there you also need to spend time on design and user experience. And this is kind of how my career got started. And I then moved to Berlin after I finished my traveling, where I met one of my co-founders, Till, whom I knew from Western Germany. And he back then introduced me, which was 2016, to blockchain technology via Ethereum. So he showed me Ethereum and smart contracts and the ability to run applications in a decentralized way without having to go through middlemen and central intermediaries. And that blew my mind. And I just thought, okay, this technology has incredible potential to change the world and make it a better place.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is very interesting because, I mean, we interview quite a lot of people in industry and they've had a long career. But to speak to somebody, of your great experience, but in limited time, which I think is and your generation, which is very, very important, is what, in terms of, you talk a lot about changing the world and making an impact on society, et cetera, et cetera. Is this very typical of your generation, that you want to change the world and leave some form of legacy that's going to have an impact?
Yeah, I think there is quite a movement in my generation now that a lot of young people feel like, okay, the way things have been done so far is good, of course, because that's how they've been and that's how it has developed. But now there's time to change a few things. And I think it's always the intergenerational change, that one generation builds something and then the next generation thinks, okay, we can make this better. And then, of course, there's some friction and also some conflict. And now there's, in terms of climate, in terms of sustainability, in terms of, in our space, data and power and ownership of platforms, of digital platforms, there's quite a lot happening. And of course, I'm a bit biased because, as you said before, I'm part of the Sigma Squared Society. So I know a lot of young entrepreneurs who are really having an impact and changing things. But I think there's Fridays for Future, for example, is a great example of a younger generation standing up and trying to change how we're treating the climate and the planet.
Absolutely.
And I think every generation, yeah.
But I mean, if you look at your demographic, you sort of were part of what is called the Facebook generation.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And reading a little bit about your generation, particularly your colleagues, there's some, you absorbed obviously the opportunity that Facebook afforded you before it became Meta. Tell me a little bit more, I hope I'm not being very controversial here, of how you feel about having been part of that generation and what your thoughts are now, without diving into Web3 yet.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, I'm just talking about your privacy, for example.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember, I think I was 14 or so, sitting at the computer, being part of Facebook and starting to chat with people. So really Instagram, using it very early on. My generation were among the first ones, and it enabled us to communicate and network on a different level. So it brought a lot of value, but at the same time, people got really stuck in and spent much more time on social media. People were portraying beautiful lives, even though they didn't feel so good. And I think it had a negative impact on mental health of teenagers, and still has, right? Everyone thinks the lives of everyone else are great and my life is not so good. This is one thing. A lot of time, I mean, those applications are made to make us as addicted as possible, because that's how Facebook or Meta monetizes. They monetize through advertising towards you, and the more time you spend on the platform, the more money they can make. So the incentives are not quite right. And then, of course, data. All our data that's been accumulated over the past years is in the hands of a few big corporations, and there's tremendous power to it, having that data. And once I spoke to a politician, and she said, as long as things are fine, people are like, okay, I don't care about my privacy, because I trust them, it's all going to be good. But you never know who's going to be in power in 5 or 10 years. You never know who's going to have access to that data in the future and is able to abuse it or has a negative impact, because she grew up in Eastern Germany when there was still the Soviet Union, and she experienced how state control has a negative impact on your life, how you really get observed and all of that. So I think we really need to be careful, and the EU made some good progress in terms of data regulations. And now with Web3, as you said, without diving into it yet, but we get the opportunity to do things differently and to structure data ownership and control in a different way, while it's still being able to have social media platforms and use that beautiful innovation and those products to actually connect on a different level, because they bring a lot of value, right? They connect the world in a way it wasn't possible before.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's down to choice, and it's down to what I call informed consent of who's using your data. Because if you look at all the terms and conditions of all the data platforms, and I challenge anybody that's read every T's and C's of every platform that they've joined. At the end of the day, you just go click, 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 because you want utility, and you basically sign up to, you don't know what you're signing up to.
Absolutely. You don't have time to read.
Yeah. So finding a way in which we can actually break that cycle is very, very important going forward. So there seems to be a lot of motivation for you in terms of, when you were at university and you studied business informatics in Berlin, and you were talking about product development. And when you say about product development, it's more digital product development. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, purely digital so far in my career.
Yeah. And then obviously the connection between the digital world and the real world, which we'll come to later on.
Later, yeah.
Exactly. But then you tell us the sort of the use cases that you worked with in terms of advanced blockchain AG, because that became, I remember, listed on the exchange, didn't it?
Yes, correct. It was the first company being listed on the Xetra and the Frankfurt Stock Exchange as a blockchain development company. And we co-initiated it back then, the peaq founding team, really as a company to dive into different areas, specifically focused on machines, especially in Germany on the automotive industry. So we worked with many big automotive firms, understanding what use cases there are really to solve problems such as decentralized charging network in order to solve the fragmentation of the current charging industry. That was one use case we worked on, but we also had some use cases in the fashion industry that we spent some time on, and it was quite an exploration phase where we also could really identify which problems there are to be solved with the technology. Advanced Blockchain AG then developed further into an investment and incubation company, which also makes sense as a publicly listed holding. And we really decided in 2020 that we want to build peaq as a complete own project. We want to really focus on the economy of things, which we will talk in depth about a bit later, and spun that out in a management buyout from Advanced Blockchain AG to focus on the intersection of IoT and Web3. The idea already of peaq is as old as 2017, where we got inspired by other projects also building in the space. And we really then used the time to consult with the real world, with real world enterprises, and understand, what makes sense to do, because we didn't just want to, launch another token and go out there and hype that up, but we wanted to really understand, okay, what makes sense to build.
Leonard, very interesting in terms of what you were saying about looking at practical use cases of the technologies that we're talking about, and particularly in industry. if you mention the word blockchain to anybody, they look at you as it's a scam and a dirty word.
Yeah.
Okay? And it would be good for us today just to give us examples of the real use cases that you put forward when you work with the automotive companies, etc., and your clients, and in particular, what successes you had, and if those successes are currently working today and are being used today within whatever process of industry. So if you could just guide us, because I think this is an opportunity to tell the world that there is some reality out there and there's some real things going on.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd like to start by quickly going into why I think it's such a negatively loaded word often, blockchain in general, or crypto, how people call it. I much more prefer Web3, because I think that is a much nicer term, which is not so loaded yet. Yeah, but by enabling tokens and by enabling money on the internet, which blockchain technology does, often it's around making money and selling tokens at a good price and so on. So I think the space attracted a lot of the wrong people for the wrong reasons, because it has this inbuilt financial incentive, which then shaped the perception of the public. And we just saw a couple of months ago, big projects imploded, which had a very negative impact on the space. So the technology is neutral and the technology is wonderful. One can do a lot of wonderful things with the technology. We just have to use it for the right things. And we need to look at all the great projects that are out there and need to differentiate between those who are just there to make quick money and those who actually are in for the long term to really build sustainable new ways of doing things. And I hope that we also can contribute towards giving the space a better reputation, because it definitely needs a better reputation. And we are in for doing that. Mm-hmm. And some of the projects that we worked on, or use cases, for example, one wonderful use case I like to mention often, and which we discussed before, is peer-to-peer electric vehicle charging. As of today, we have a charging infrastructure in Europe where a lot of different platforms provide charging stations. It's so-called charge point operators. A user has to sign up with all of those platforms in order to charge there. So when someone drives through Germany, in order to charge at charging stations, they need to have 10, 15 different accounts, cards in order to charge, to authenticate and pay at those charging stations. Because it's fragmented, it's central different platforms, and every platform has their own user base and their own charging station base. And you need to sign up with all of those. Furthermore, there are a lot of charging stations at home. Like, charging stations at home are much, much more in numbers than public charging stations. But those charging stations at home, they are not accessible publicly because there's no digital way on making them visible. Hey, here's a charging station where you can charge. And there's no way to pay for charging at such a charging station, because you would need to integrate traditional payment providers. They cost money. You need to, or would need to integrate another central platform that costs money again. And by enabling peer-to-peer electric vehicle charging, by putting all those charging stations on the blockchain network, public ones and private ones, and enabling peer-to-peer transactions, technically all users, all cars can charge at any charging station, public or private, and have direct settlement without going through central platforms and so on. So cutting out the middleman, as we know that technology is capable of doing, is a perfect use case there. And you would then only need one identity to be able to charge at any public and any private charging station. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the use cases that we've worked on for quite some time with automotive already and still working on. It's being launched as a completely decentralized project now, as a so-called DAO, because we also learned and realized this can't be launched by a central big player. It needs to be launched in a neutral way, and then the big central players can join and use this neutral backbone on facilitating charging infrastructure.
Yeah.
And since you mentioned before, where did that lead to? Just 3 weeks ago, we announced the start of GaiaX Move ID, which is a consortia that's led by Bosch and funded by the European Union, where Bosch united a lot of Web3 startups, companies, and big enterprises such as Airbus, Continental, Denso, to really bring together the expertise in the field of mobility and create standards around a decentralized infrastructure for mobility in Europe. We as peaq are one of the blockchain networks that are part of that is implementing those standards, and that is then there to build applications such as decentralized charging, or also something like a decentralized car sharing platform on top of that, of those standards of this initiative. Mm-hmm. And what's beautiful there is that we can work together in a European framework and not have silos in our efforts, because before, a lot of companies and players they wanted to build an open decentralized network, and then there were multiple emerging, and then you have fragmentation again. But by giving that framework in GaiaX to creating this neutral data infrastructure for Europe, we can really collaborate and have the funding and the development power and the general setup to make that happen and to create a decentralized infrastructure for mobility, starting with mobility, and then it can go beyond.
I mean, you're very passionate about this, and I think it's a very commendable idea. And I use the word idea because if you can tell me when you brought this whole concept to the fore, and you obviously must have tested it amongst various providers. So what scale did you get of adoption?
Yeah. So you're right. The issue is really to get from that idea to mass scale adoption, because the disruption is hard in the sense of business model. Getting everyone to switch from the traditional centralized business model to an open decentralized network, that's really where the challenge lays. The technical development, the product development is no problem. We can do all of that. But switching everyone to an open decentralized network is the problem. So we tested with multiple different providers, and we are actually testing at the moment. As I said before, we've started building that use case on a centralized network, on a permissioned network, which was closed with a few players, because we thought initially, okay, we're going to build a consortium network, we're going to onboard all the players that need to be onboarded. But then you have the problem that one player starts it with you, and then the other big OEM automotive company says, they are already on board, they kind of started it. No, I don't want to join anymore because it's branded with their brand kind of. So we realized, okay, this is not the way to do it. And now this project is being launched as a DAO, as a decentralized autonomous organization, really being neutral and really being open for anyone to join. And what we believe is that this will enable actually to unite the key players in one place. Yes, this is one way, like the structure is set up. The other part is the business model, because everyone in the space, since many years, companies are doing proof of concepts, testing different concepts around blockchain and what you can do with it. But no one really cracked the business model aspect of it yet. And those big companies, at some point, they have top management. They say, okay, how do we make money? What is the revenue model here? And from our point of view, this is really, once this is in place, the full disruption can happen. And this is why we also at peaq work so much on designing the right economic incentives around the network, participating in the network, to enable everyone, every stakeholder that is required to be on board, building new sustainable revenue streams. And this is to be rolled out next year. So we are gearing up to launching this economic model also in production. And from our experience in the past years, this is what's missing as of today.
Yeah.
The economic reasons to build in Web3.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two dimensions. I mean, what you're talking about, the economic reasons, is very interesting, because obviously joining this network as a provider of services, as an electricity provider, okay, you want to be in control of your customer. That's the old. You want to influence your customer, and therefore you create what's called silos of control. Yeah. Whereas when you break it out, what you're doing is you're now going, okay, we're contributing to everybody's already part of the European Union. We all understand the benefit of being in a collective anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So we think, we're talking politically and even economically, but when it comes to individual business, we still tend to think in the old paradigm rather than in joining a group or a community or whatever. And it's very interesting is that they say, well, the reason we want to do that business model because we want to know what our return on investment is going to be if we do advertising campaigns and things like that. What's our return? And they haven't thought about the fact that if you contribute to a marketing campaign on behalf of the collective or the network does a lot of that marketing for you anyway.
Absolutely. Because you can really get word of mouth going, right? You can really, and everyone becomes an evangelist kind of the network and what it can do. And I'm totally with you. And I believe that those networks and the ability to incentivize people will 100% disrupt central platforms, because you can just give everyone skin in the game. You can create much better economic designs it's cheaper for users can make money, individuals can make money, companies can make money. And our approach really is, we see the peaq network as a whole ecosystem, and the whole ecosystem is making revenue. So the network is making revenue, and that revenue is then fairly distributed and split between all the stakeholders according to their contributions, according to what they've done, according to what the community thinks their contribution is worth. So I think the way to see Web3 networks is not as a traditional company, but really as an overall ecosystem where a large pie is being created, which ideally gets larger and larger and larger, and all kinds of companies and players can just get a piece of that pie according to how much they participate and contribute.
I mean, let's not forget, it's very transparent.
Yeah, also.
This is the beauty of this. It's like, for example, and we look at the telecom networks, that everybody uses the same telecom infrastructure, where certain telecom companies own certain bandwidth or open and towers, but they do benefit from being part of a global network, and the way that they can monetize their interaction, but it's not as transparent to everybody else. It's very transparent internally to their own silo within that space, but it's very difficult, to aggregate the data to understand what's going on. Whereas building these type of organizations, you can trust the data.
Absolutely. And you can have all the settlements done directly. In telco, you need roaming. You need to settle between the different providers to see, okay, how many users have used my network that are not my customers. And using blockchain, you can have all those settlements done instantly. You basically don't need roaming anymore.
Yes.
You make roaming obsolete.
Yeah. So moving on to peaq, and this is, you said that you did the management buyout, you took peaq. What is the vision and the mission of peaq? And in particular, how are you've gone from what is called Internet of Things to the economy of things. Can you just explain that a little bit more detail for our audience?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we started peaq by really asking ourselves, how does the future look like if what we call the economy of things and the age of automation is built on Web 2? And then we thought, if all those robotaxis, if all those machines that are going to make a lot of jobs obsolete, that are going to serve society and work for humanity, so humans don't need to do so many boring and also dangerous jobs anymore, like driving a car around all day long. How does that look like when it's built on Web 2? And we then realized this is not a good future, because all that value that's generated from the automation will end up in the hands of a few big companies, in the hands of a few individuals, maybe also in the hands of a few governments, that then will have to distribute that value via universal basic income or similar to people. And people will become more and more dependent on a few institutions and governments. And we thought this is not a good future, but we like the idea of automation. We like the idea of humans not having to do boring jobs anymore, but can spend more time on what they love, like becoming artists without making money with it or whatever, like really spending time better than in boring repetitive jobs. And we thought using Web3 or blockchain is really the chance to create a future where the age of automation and those machines run on a decentralized open network where everyone can participate. Like, I'm a private person, I can add my charging station, I can add my car, they can generate value, they can generate money, I can invest into that network and earn rewards from the overall network value. And decades into the future, a concept that we play with is called universal basic ownership. Maybe even people can get income from such a network without having to do anything for it, because there's abundance of value generated. But this is like many decades into the future. So the vision really overall is to democratize the age of automation, to enable a machine economy that runs decentralized, open, and fair, instead of a few big platforms, tech platforms like we know it in Web 2, running the whole show and profiting massively, while everyone else is having a harder and harder time to find a job, because a lot of things will be automated. This is kind of the deeper why, the deeper, bigger vision behind what we're doing. And then, of course, there are those problems like fragmented ecosystems in the charging space, which we talked about before. There's bad user experience because of all those silos, because the internet is not one open system, but many different big platforms. You have a Facebook ID, you have a Google ID, and then you can sign up here and there, but it's not really your identity, and it exists on one platform and not openly in the internet, kind of. Yeah, and to go into depth on IoT to EOT, as of now, the Internet of Things is a place where machines mainly send and receive data. And the economy of things is going to be a place where machines can also offer and consume goods and services, such as an electric vehicle goes to a charging station and consumes energy from the charging station, and then pays the charging station with energy. And then this vehicle picks up someone who booked a taxi ride and then receives money from that person. And then it pays for some toll road it is driving through. And all of that happens directly, peer-to-peer, in transactions. And all of that wouldn't be really possible, because then you have maybe one toll road platform, one charging platform in Web 2. You need an open ecosystem. You need open identities in order for those things to work frictionless. And this is what the economy of things is going to be. Also private individuals and machines able to monetize their data. For example, a vehicle is collecting data where there's road damage, and then this data can be sold to a city that then knows, okay, we need to fix the street there. All of that is the economy of things, where data not only can be sent somewhere, but data can also be monetized by the machine or by the individual.
This is very interesting. You know, you mentioned a few things, and it's great to talk to you in terms of your generation, which gave freely their identity and their data to major platforms and made these platforms very, very wealthy.
Yeah.
And then you talk about, you have identity in Google, you have identity in Meta, you have identity, obviously, other platforms within Meta like Instagram. Okay. And so you create all these identities, right? And then suddenly you get, and you did say something you don't own that identity, which I think is a very important thing. And we need to go and examine that a little bit further, because what happens if I get banned from Twitter, or I get banned from Instagram or Facebook, right? Ultimately, my identity has been taken away from me.
Yeah, correct.
So I'm just trying to think it from that perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, even though you talk about the car, the charging station, any physical device has its own identity as well, and its own identity can be monetized within an ecosystem. Okay, it's very important. Is how so how do we construct an identity which is, number one, really me? Okay, everybody trusts who I am. I'm in control of what people see of me.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime they see me, they trust that it is me, even if I am an avatar of myself, as an example.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually really what you just described is the concept of self-sovereign identities, which is currently on the rise and which is made possible through blockchain technology as well, where people can own an identity, an online identity. They control it. There's no government, there's no institution that can take it away from them, because you are really owning that property, kind of. And then there are governments or institutions that can assign, they're called verifiable credentials, to your identity. So, for example, the German government could assign a passport credential to my identity, verifying that this is really Leonard, this is a citizen of Germany, and those are his attributes, and so on and so on. And that concept enables us to actually own and control our digital identities going forward, not being, like you said before, you're banned from Twitter, banned from Facebook. You actually don't own those identities. They are rented out to you. Like mobile phone numbers as well. They can be taken away from you anytime. And there's a problem in that, because without becoming or going controversial here as well, when we talk and think about, for example, free speech, if a few platforms are controlling who can say something and who doesn't, then power is in the hands of a few. And that in the end is a problem for democracy, because democracy is all about negotiating the truth between individuals. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think self-sovereign identities really will enable us to have a much better internet, and especially like what you said before, also control over our data. So we can actually decide on whom we want to share our data with, mm-hmm. and how we want to monetize it, and being conscious of how it's being used, which is right now not the case. We are being productized. Those social media platforms don't cost, and we pay with our data.
So this approach that you're talking about has a big issue in terms of you are going up against Meta, Facebook. Because let's think about it, they are legacy system. It's a legacy business model, legacy technology. With the new technologies today, it's incredibly, and they've had the opportunity to adopt these new technologies, and they've actually elected not to.
Yeah.
Can you speculate why?
Yeah, they even worked on it with DM, which was called Libra before, which is now Aptos, but it's independent from Facebook. So the technology is being used also in a decentralized way going forward. I think it really comes down to the business model problem again. When you have to maximize shareholder value, when you have to maximize your profits, and your profits are heavily based on using and also abusing user data in order to advertise to them, making them as addicted as possible to consuming and staying as long as possible on the platform, then I think you and me agree this is not a very good and healthy way of doing things. It worked, it was ultra successful, and I think we can all be grateful. It's part of human progress, it's part of human history. But more and more people realize now, okay, this is not the way we should and want to do things going forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you, either Facebook disrupts itself or it will get disrupted. And it's probably not in the very near future because it will take quite some time. But I do think Facebook will get disrupted because you can just create much better incentive systems on a decentralized network where people can earn money and individuals profit more, and that's why they're gonna make the shift at some point. I also believe,
Sorry, but Meta has already, and we're talking a bit about now Web3, they're already creating an environment where anybody that creates anything in Web3 can actually use the rails of Facebook for the application of their Web3 experience that they've created, a metaverse experience.
Yeah, correct.
Does Meta. So when we had this, and then you're now sitting down at peaq and you want to raise capital, and you recently raised 6 million in funding from the likes of Fundamental Labs, HashKey, Delta VC, GSR, Cypher Capital, and others. When you spoke to them, and obviously the question must have come up, is why peaq will be that company that's going to be one of those disruptors, if I can use that word, or one of those growth stories that's going to readjust the balance in terms of your vision and your mission of making these decentralized, autonomous business or communities, which are effectively the economy of things. So tell me a little bit about the discussions that you had.
Absolutely. As you can imagine, it's not easy to raise capital for such a big vision, also long-term vision, and it's very futuristic. I think what we really managed well is to show that we've worked for many years in the space. We didn't just start. We gathered a lot of experience. We had a really good idea and understanding of what we need to build on that layer one, what the core product needs to look like in order for being an ideal decentralized platform to build those applications. And then I think what makes a real big difference, we had an answer to, okay, how do we get those players to build on peaq and use peaq? How do we disrupt the status quo? And that all comes down to the economics. I think we were able to really explain those investors. We know that in the end, especially for businesses and individuals, it all comes down to financial incentives. And we were able to show them a way of how we're going to design those financial incentives so that people will make the shift from Web 2 platforms to this Web 3 network, peaq network, because they can actually earn more money there, or they can save more money there, or they can build new revenue streams there for organizations. And this really enabled us to get those backers on board, that they then all said, at some point this is going to happen. It makes a lot of sense what you guys are saying. We can all see that it makes sense to crack open those silos and those closed systems and make it all available. I think we all agree that this will happen and it makes sense. The question is when, and the question is who. And timing is always super important. We think in the next couple of years, this can really pick up and accelerate. And I think we also understood now, spending many years in the space, looking at the projects and the problems, all the elements that are required to make that happen. Of course, yes, I'm biased here because we're working on that every day, but we are very confident, and our investors as well, that we know in which direction to walk and to build. And of course, we will adjust on the way. We will learn a lot, but we have the fundamentals in place.
I mean, it's very interesting that the language you use is very interesting, is that when we're talking to investors, we talk about disruption. But if we talk to businesses, should we use the word disruption, or we should use the word of transformation?
Yeah, probably transformation.
Which is better, because I think it's a very negative word, disruption. I like the idea of transformation and digital transformation.
Yeah.
And enabling and transparency and trust and all those words, which are all good, positive words.
Yes.
And I think that's important. I think that's one of the great critiques I can say today within the industry, is that we sometimes come across in a very negative way.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, society is always going to challenge, lots of, young geek tech people trying to take over the world and disrupt. That's not, if I was running a PR firm, I would
not put that in the headline.
Exactly.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
so it's good that it's enabling, it's collaborative, and all those sort of words I think is really, really important, because that's one of the challenges that we have in this whole digital transformation journey, is the language that we use. And it's important that that language is embracing rather than divisive.
I fully agree. Yeah, no one wants to get disrupted. No one wants to be on that side. And I think there are a lot of strong us versus them narratives in the space, big tech versus Web3 and so on. Yeah. And those narratives can be strong in order to build community and get people behind you. But I agree with you. It really should come from a good place, onboarding people instead of pushing people away and making them kind of go against you.
Yes, I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently we talk about Web3. Okay, we know what that means, but let's break it up. It means words like metaverse, words like NFTs.
Yeah.
Okay, and what's the experience? Most people recognize NFTs by the fact that people have made loads of money selling digital versions of art.
Yeah.
Okay? Which is good, because it creates a hype and an exposure to a technology. And you and I know, and we've been talking about self-sovereign identity. We are unique, you unique, I'm unique, I'm you, Leonard, I'm Hilton. I can have my own identity, and I can represent my identity by an NFT, which is a non-fungible token. Okay, all it is a digital bit of code that says, this is me, and you can trust me. That's all it is. And it can't be copied.
Exactly.
Unless it's been, well, it can't be copied if it's on a trusted network. So all these things, people use all these hype words, but in reality, the real utility is in the real world. That's why you've got the economy of things. So even a car has its own
identity,
its identity. So and then you've got metaverse and people talking about Roblox, Sandbox, and all these different spaces where you go and buy land in the digital space, which I think is another hype.
Yeah.
You know, you're just buying data, really, and then reselling that data to somebody else because that data is positioned to somebody else who has perception that that data next to yours is worth more than the data that you have.
Yeah.
You know, but there's this disconnect between, because, you know, when we talk about the metaverse, we talk about accessing the metaverse and that 3D experience with the Oculus goggles or some 3D interactive environment, just called virtual reality.
Yeah.
There's a interim step, which is augmented reality or mixed reality, where I still have my mobile phone, I still have my computer. I can interact in the 3D digital world with my traditional devices. There's that bridge. So give me a little bit of examples of what you're doing. Are you going into that total VR space or AR space, or how's that fitting in the peaq vision and mission?
Yeah, it's great that you're raising that question, because it's something we are thinking about a lot these days as well. So the peaq vision and mission is really focused on the real world assets, real cars, real charging stations, real drones, real parking spots whatsoever, creating actual real value, real revenue based on real world transactions. That's what it is about, using something decentralized finance as well, but to actually finance real world assets that then generate real revenues and reward the people who provided that liquidity and so on. So this is really our focus. We are not an on-chain project, which is just, you know, moving some money from A to B on a blockchain, but really making that bridge to the real world. So this is what peaq is all about. At the same time, the vision is long, and there's quite a way to go there. So we do work on making it possible to experience that machine economy and economy of things, and also understand incentives and how well they work by incorporating some metaverse elements, by incorporating a virtual aspect of that machine economy to understand how those things are working. So we do that because we also want to enable the community and people to feel and experience the economy of things before it's actually there, because we see that as a vital step on the way towards building the community and getting enough companies, individuals, even government to back that vision. So yes, it is part of our roadmap, but it's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is really to focus on enabling all those real world transactions and using concepts such as decentralized finance to finance real world assets, to use NFTs representing ownership of real world assets or of pools of real world assets, and not of a JPEG or not of digital art. So that is really how we want to utilize Web3 technologies.
That's brilliant. So basically you're talking about the digital twin.
Yeah, correct.
Of your economic network or your building, where you have all these data collection points or self-sovereign components that are fulfilling a function within an economy.
Yes, correct. They are all existing with their identity. They can then be owned by NFTs. They can transact and interact with each other. People can provide financial resources so other people can finance machines, and then they have to, from the overall revenue that machine is making, they have to pay a certain amount back to the financiers so they can create actual real world yields and returns. And really designing a whole new economy on a Web3 network. This is our vision for the economy of things, and we're working on it, and it's already happening. It already started.
Fantastic. Leonard, this has been a very fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed talking with you and learning from you.
Likewise.
You and your team have a great vision and a great mission. One little forecast from you. How long do you think it would take before we start really seeing the benefit of the work that you're doing and others in terms of creating these economic systems?
I think the first tangible results will be there in about 2 years, and then 5 years until major transformations have happened. Major transformations have happened. And I think in 10 years, it will run in the background of a lot of things without people being aware. And that's really when you have mainstream adoption. People are using it in the background. They are not aware they are using it because the technology is a technology that runs in the background. Yeah, that would be my predictions.
Thank you. I'm not going to hold you to that, but it's nice to know.
Awesome. Yeah,
Leonard,
thanks a lot.
Thank you so much indeed for a wonderful hour. And I really, really, really enjoyed speaking to you. And thank you.
Likewise, Hilton. Thanks a lot for having us and enabling us to share our vision and mission.
And in terms of how people can interact with you, your social media, or directly with your platform, are you listed as your name?
Yes, I am. On LinkedIn, on Twitter, our website, of course, as peaq is a good place. We also have a Discord channel where people can interact on the community level directly. But personally, with me, LinkedIn or Twitter are probably the easiest.
Fantastic. Leonard, thank you very much indeed for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having us.
If you're interested in knowing more about citiesabc.com with openbusinesscouncil.org and Fashion ABC, go to our platforms as well, as you can find me on social media and DM me, which is mainly Hilton Supra, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And do go to the other interviews we have done on YouTube. And don't forget to like and comment. And thank you very much for your time and engaging with this interview on Citiesabc.